Ask a mechanic what they drive, and you will get a Toyota. But in 2024, Toyota began tearing down brand new truck engines to hunt for metal shavings its own factory left inside them. The fix was not a repair. Toyota replaced the whole engine. And yet, walk behind any repair shop in America and the cars the technicians drove in are still faded Corollas, high-mileage Tacomas, and 4Runners showing 200,000 miles. These are people who know exactly what breaks. So why do they keep parking a Toyota? Corollas, Japan, 1948. In a machine shop belonging to a small and badly struggling automaker, a former textile engineer named Taiichi Ono began rearranging equipment on the floor. He didn't have money for new machinery, and he didn't have the production volume that American plants in Detroit enjoyed. What he had was an idea he had carried out of a spinning mill. So why would a textile machine matter to a company trying to build cars? Ono had spent 11 years on textile floors before he ever touched a car. Inside that mill, he studied the Type G automatic loom, perfected by founder Sakichi Toyoda in 1924. The instant a single thread broke, the machine stopped itself. No supervisor had to notice, and no inspector had to catch the flaw at the end of the run. The defect ended the moment it began. Ono carried that principle onto a car assembly line, and in doing so, he inverted the way the industry thought about quality. In the American mass production model, the line never stopped. Inspection was a separate department at the far end of the plant, catching defects after they had already been built into hundreds of vehicles. Ono installed an andon cord above the workstations instead. Any operator on the floor at any position could pull that cord and halt the entire factory the moment something looked wrong. Stopping the line was not treated as a failure. It was treated as the system working. Those two ideas became the pillars of what the world would later call the Toyota production system. Just in time, meaning parts arrive at the workstation only as the assembly line calls for them. And jidoka, meaning the machine itself catches the flaw, rather than an inspector catching it at the far end of the plant. Underneath both sat standardized work, leveled production schedules, and Kaizen, the practice of continuous small improvement on the shop floor. But how do you stop the same defect returning next Tuesday? Ono's answer was a discipline rather than a technology. Walk to the Jinbei, the actual spot on the shop floor where the work happens, watch with your own eyes, and ask why the failure occurred 5 times over until the question stops producing a symptom and starts producing a cause. Paper Kanban cards move through the plant carrying build instructions, so a machinist in one corner of the factory was answering real demand instead of a forecast written months earlier in an office. But here's the detail that most accounts skip past. None of this was a marketing philosophy. It was a survival strategy built by a company with no capital, no scale, and no room to scrap a single component. The obsession with defects came from an inability to pay for them, and that phrasing is not decoration. By 1950, Toyota was days from collapse. The banks had forced a reconstruction plan, 2 plants were closed, and more than 2,000 workers lost their jobs, which triggered a strike that shut the factory down for most of 2 months. Kiichiro Toyota, the founder's son, resigned in June to take responsibility for the layoffs. He was dead within 2 years. What saved the company was a United States Army order for trucks during the Korean War. Detroit's plants, running at volumes Toyota could only imagine, did not take the approach seriously for decades. Ono spread the system through Toyota's plants across the 1950s and the 1960s, then through its supplier base. Outside Japan, it took hold in 1984 when Toyota and General Motors opened a joint venture plant in Fremont, California. 6 years later, a study out of MIT gave the approach a name that stuck: lean production. By then, the results were already sitting in driveways. So, what did that system put on the road? Ask a technician who has been turning wrenches since the 1980s which Toyota engine they trust most, and you will hear about a 2.4-liter 4-cylinder that nobody would call exciting. The 22R and its fuel-injected successor, the 22RE, powered Toyota pickups and early forerunners through the years when Toyota's small trucks were building their reputation on job sites and fire roads. The engine made roughly 105 to 116 horsepower depending on the year. That isn't a number anyone brags about. What sat underneath it was a thick-walled cast iron block with a deep skirt design, a single overhead cam, and low compression. It wasn't fussy about fuel quality, and it didn't punish an owner who missed a service interval. Mechanics who have pulled these engines apart describe them as a masterclass in accessibility, because everything you need to reach is reachable. But it had weaknesses. Valve adjustment every 30,000 miles was not optional, and neglecting it produced the tick that shops learned to recognize by ear. The single-row timing chain used plastic guides that wear out and are widely considered the engine's soft spot. Nobody in a service bay would call it perfect, they'd call it honest. The same design logic scaled upward. Toyota's 2JZ Inline-6, best known now for what tuners did to it, was built with an iron block, a closed deck, forged internals, and oil squirters from the factory. In stock form, it operated nowhere near its structural limits, which is why unopened examples are documented past 300,000 and 400,000 miles. The 4.7-liter 2UZFE V8 that went into the Land Cruiser and the early Tundra used a cast iron block at a moment when its own siblings in the Lexus sedans used aluminum to save weight. Toyota chose the heavier option on purpose. Why would an engineering department deliberately give up horsepower and fuel economy it had already paid to develop? Because the engineers signing off on those blocks were optimizing for a different number entirely. Toyota consistently tuned engines to deliver less than they were capable of, which left a margin of structural headroom that absorbed heat, load, neglect, and time. A second advantage shows up at the parts counter, and metallurgy plays no part in it. Toyota kept designs in production far longer than the industry norm and shared components aggressively across the lineup. A sensor on a Camry turns up on a Sienna. A wheel bearing on a Tacoma shows up on a 4Runner. For a technician at a parts counter on a Saturday, the part is on the shelf, the labor time is known, and the bolt pattern is the one that was there 15 years ago. Repairability isn't a feature Toyota advertises. It is a side effect of a parts catalog that refuses to redesign what already works. But shop floor consensus is exactly the kind of evidence that turns into folklore. Technicians see a skewed sample, the vehicles that arrive on a flatbed, rather than the ones that never come into the shop at all. So the useful test is whether independent researchers, working from registration records and repair invoices, reach the same conclusion. This engineering choice seemed unremarkable while it was happening. It wasn't. There is a measurable consequence, and it shows up in registration records rather than brand loyalty. The research firm IC Cars runs an annual study estimating the probability that a given model reaches 250,000 miles. In the 2025 edition, the average vehicle on American roads carried a 4.8% chance of getting there. The Toyota Sequoia carried a 39% chance. That is more than 8 times the industry average, and Toyota placed 10 models in the top 25. Repair costs data points the same direction from a different angle. RepairPal, which aggregates shop invoices, puts the average annual repair and maintenance cost for a Toyota at $441 against $652 across all brands. The average Toyota visits a shop for unscheduled work roughly 0.3 of a time per year. The Corolla specifically sits at $362 annually, with a 7% probability that any given repair turns out to be a major one. And in Consumer Reports' most recent annual reliability survey, built from owner responses covering roughly 380,000 vehicles, Toyota took back the top position from Subaru, with Lexus close behind in third. But does any of that actually describe the car sitting in a driveway, or just the average of a very large spreadsheet? It's a fair objection, and averages hide outliers in both directions. A neglected Corolla with a skipped timing service will still strand somebody on a Tuesday morning. What the data supports is narrower than the folklore. Toyota vehicles fail less often, fail less expensively when they do, and tolerate imperfect maintenance better than the field around them. There is a reason this reputation persists. Numbers that consistent across 3 independent studies built from owner surveys, odometer records, and shop invoices are not an accident of marketing. And notice what all 3 measure. Not how a new Toyota feels in its first year, but how a vehicle behaves in year 12 on its 3rd owner. On a maintenance schedule nobody followed perfectly. If you find this kind of engineering history useful, subscribe. This channel goes deep on the machines that outlived their era every week. By 2016, the argument had produced a case study nobody planned. Victor Shepard of Houma, Louisiana, bought a 2007 Tundra SR5 double cab with the 4.7-liter V8. He delivered parts for oil companies, which meant regular runs from Louisiana to North Dakota to Wyoming to Virginia on very short notice. Oil changes happened roughly once a month, which for him worked out to about every 10,000 miles. The same dealership service department in his hometown handled that maintenance, and very little else was ever done to the truck. In 9 years, he put just over 1,020,000 miles on that Tundra. The engine was original, and so were the transmission and the paint. But the odometer reading is not the interesting part of this story. What Toyota did with the truck afterward is, when a photograph of the odometer reached Toyota's chief truck engineer, the company offered Shepard a trade. He drove away in a new Tundra, and the 2007 went to Toyota's Research and Development Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where more than 100 people took it apart, piece by piece, to understand what 1,000,000 miles actually does to a vehicle. One analyst on that teardown said the condition of the truck surprised him more than anything he had pulled apart. The honest footnote is that Shepard did it again, putting 1,000,000 miles on a 2014 Tundra and crossing the mark in April of 2025. That one was not clean. The transmission started slipping around 780,000 miles, badly enough that climbing a hill at 70 would leave him doing 35 by the top, and it eventually had to be rebuilt, which is closer to what a technician expects and more useful than a perfect story. So the reputation is earned. What makes this story worth following is the part where Toyota stopped applying its own rules to itself. The same conservatism that built that reputation eventually became the thing the company walked away from. A first serious crack opened in 2009. In November of that year, Toyota recalled 3.8 million vehicles over floor mats that could trap the accelerator pedal. 2 months later, a second recall followed for accelerator pedals that could stick or return to idle slowly. By February of 2010, company president Akio Toyoda was sitting in front of a congressional committee in Washington, apologizing on camera. The technical verdict was more nuanced than the headlines. Investigations by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and by NASA examined the electronic throttle software and found no defect capable of making the vehicles accelerate on their own. What the Justice Department pursued instead was the company's conduct. In 2014, Toyota entered a deferred prosecution agreement and paid a $1.2 billion penalty over how it had described the problem to regulators and to the public while the recalls were still being decided. That distinction matters, and most retellings collapse it. The mechanical systems held up under scrutiny. The corporate communication did not. So was that the end of Toyota's quality reckoning? Years later, a second problem surfaced, and this one was purely mechanical. Toyota retired the naturally aspirated 5.7-liter V8 in the Tundra for a smaller 3.4-liter twin-turbocharged V6, the V35A. The change improved efficiency and helped with emissions compliance. It also added complexity to a truck line whose identity had been built on the absence of it. In May of 2024, Toyota recalled roughly 102,000 Tundras and Lexus LX600 SUVs. Machining debris left inside the engine during manufacturing could stick to the crankshaft main bearings. Under sustained load, those bearings could fail, producing knocking, rough running, a no-start condition, or a loss of power at highway speed. At the time of filing, Toyota knew of 824 related warranty claims. The remedy was not a repair. It was a new engine, and more than 70,000 were replaced. Sit with that for a moment. An automaker whose identity rests on the andon cord, on catching the defect at the workstation where it happens, shipped tens of thousands of engine blocks with metal shavings inside them. But how does a company running the most studied quality system in manufacturing history miss something a shop vacuum would catch? Scale and newness arrived together. Production of the V35A jumped sharply when a new engine plant in Alabama came online. And a new engine on a new line has no accumulated history of small corrections behind it. Then, in November of 2025, Toyota expanded the campaign. Just under 127,000 additional vehicles were added, covering 2022 through 2024 Tundras, 2022 through 2024 Lexus LX models, and the 2024 Lexus GX. The reason for the expansion is the part that stings. Engines built after the original corrective action still contained debris. Across the campaigns, more than 270,000 trucks and SUVs have been affected. Toyota has since developed a resonant frequency inspection that reads the #1 main bearing without opening the engine, so only the units that fail get replaced. The Tacoma tells a quieter version. Its well-understood 5-speed automatic gave way to a modern 8-speed, and owners have reported drivability complaints since. Assembly also moved from Texas to Mexico, adding another variable to a process that had been stable for years. Look at that list, and a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with whether Toyota is good or bad at building cars. The trouble sits almost entirely on the newest powertrains. The long-running designs, the naturally aspirated V8 engines refined across decades of small corrections, kept behaving exactly the way they always had. Which brings us back to that employee parking lot behind the shop. The Corollas and 4Runners and Tacomas in that lot skew older, and that is not nostalgia. It is a technician looking at a specific window of engineering decisions and recognizing what those decisions produced. What they trust is not the badge on the grill. It is the philosophy of leaving structural margin on the table, of adopting a new technology only after somebody else has proven it, of building quality into a process rather than inspecting for it at the end. Has that philosophy disappeared? Not entirely. Consumer Reports found that conventional hybrids, the systems Toyota has been refining since the first Prius rolled out in the late 1990s, remain among the most dependable powertrains on the road, while a substantial share of the least reliable models in the same survey were electric or plug-in hybrid. The andon cord thinking is still in the building. It shows up wherever Toyota has had 20 years to iterate, and it goes missing wherever the company had to move fast. Which points at the real pressure. Emissions rules, efficiency targets, and a market moving quicker than any long refinement cycle allows are pushing every automaker toward technology that has not had decades to prove itself. Toyota's advantage was never a secret alloy or a proprietary process. It was patience. And patience is the resource the modern car industry has least of. So the technicians parking behind that shop 20 years from now will be looking at a very different set of engines built by a company that can no longer afford to wait and see what breaks on somebody else's cars first. So will the badge on the grill still mean what it meant in 1998? And can any manufacturer still afford the discipline that put it there? That question does not get settled in a press release. It gets settled one odometer at a time.